you, Laura. Hello, my name is Esther Ann. I work at the Capacity Building Center for Tribes out of the University of Southern Maine. I'm Passamaquoddy, part of the Wabanaki Confederacy here in the Dawnland, and I'm happy to be here today. As a federal law, as you all know, ICWA requires states and courts to protect the best interest of Indian children by keeping their connections to family, community, and culture intact. Compliance is mandatory, yet many state child welfare and court systems struggle to consistently and effectively meet these requirements. With a strong understanding of the rights and responsibilities of ICWA, tribal leaders and child welfare professionals can help improve collaborations, ensure compliance, and better protect their communities. This is part 2 of a 3-webinar compliance series. And what now? New lessons learned in tribal state partnerships. We want to recognize that we have many people joining us today from various entities to hear from these 3 sites: Oklahoma, North Dakota, and Minnesota. They have all received ICWA Implementation Partnership Grants from the Administration for Children and Families. So knowing we have such a large audience and we expect to have a lot of questions in the chat in the Q&A, we just want to let you know we'll do our best to answer, make sure all your questions get answered and direct them to the appropriate people as they come in. Laura and I will do our best. If we don't get to answer these questions live today for you, we'll do our best to look at them after and provide you with resources to get those answers for you. It's really important to mention that the Capacity Building Center for Tribes recognizes the legalities around ICWA implementation. And we want to remind folks that we are not in a position to give legal advice. So some questions may not be answered. So I thank you for your time. I will quickly share the names of our presenters, and then as they go through, they'll share more about themselves. I hit the space bar with my hand. From Oklahoma, we have Jonathan Moore, Tiata Loper, and Jessica Hargrove. From Minnesota, we have Bree Bussey and Mark Erickson. And from North Dakota, we have Harmony Bercier. So each group, we're going to go in that order with Oklahoma first, and we will start there.
Halito, Chichukma, Sohochafoet, Tiata Loper, Chakasha Saya. I am a citizen of the Chickasaw Nation and a descendant of the Choctaw Nation. I currently serve as the OICWA grant coordinator. When we first met in 2019, Ann Davis was serving as the grant manager and delivered Oklahoma's presentation. Ann has moved to the Muskogee Nation as the Child and Family Services Director, and we're certainly missing her role and support. So our grant team today, I'll let my teammates introduce themselves, and then we can move into our presentation.
I'm Jonathan Moore, and I'm a senior researcher with Oklahoma DHS, and I handle research and program evaluation needs that have arisen for the ICWA partnership.
Hello, I'm Jessica Hargrove, and I am the ICWA Partnership Grant Program Field Representative for Oklahoma Department of Human Services.
Next slide. I'm going to briefly recap the outline of just the initial webinar that Ann Davis presented and just set the landscape of Oklahoma. Oklahoma is home to 38 federally recognized tribes. There are 77 counties and 26 judicial districts. The partners of the grant are Oklahoma Department of Human Services, the Court Improvement Program, and the Oklahoma Indian Child Welfare Association. Our first webinar, we really just provided the history of our tribal state work group, the goal and grant objectives, the structure around our model of collaboration, and then our grant project activities and timeframes. So today I'm going to share the just brief history of Oklahoma's ICWA collaboration between tribes and state. And on our slide, just as a representation of a timeline, the Oklahoma Indian Child Welfare Act was passed in 1982 when Oklahoma became one of the first states in the United States to pass a law governing how child welfare cases involving Native children ought to be handled in Oklahoma. The Oklahoma Indian Child Welfare Act established higher standards for Indian child welfare practice than the National Indian Child Welfare Act. And then ICWA, the Oklahoma Indian Child Welfare Association, was established in 1984. 1988, our very first tribal state agreement was signed. In 2006, Tribal State Work Group was founded. Jonathan and Jessica are going to share in a moment more information on the tribal state agreements and tribal state work group. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail there. In 2015, the ICWA Snapshot was published by Casey Family Programs and was really instrumental in providing data and research for Oklahoma to apply for the ICWA Partnership Grant. And I lay out these accomplishments to truly identify the existing structure encompassing tribal state relationships here in Oklahoma. In the work of Tribal State Work Group, that's really where the big projects around ICWA practice was birthed. Two of those big accomplishments was the establishment of a tribal coordinator team and the application and awarding of the ICWA Partnership Grant. And so just identifying those existing relationships in space that serve as a platform for tribal state Indian child welfare work to continue to progress. And we'll circle back to that as in other areas of our presentation, just to identify sustainability. Like the grant will come to an end. And so we have those existing structures in place, and those structures will remain to carry out the work around Indian child welfare. Next slide, Jessica.
So a little bit more about the tribal state agreements that Teota referenced. The Comanche Nation was actually the first tribe in Oklahoma to enter into a tribal state agreement, and that was in 1988. And right now, of all 38 tribes in Oklahoma, there are currently 38 tribal state agreements with each of the tribes, and those are the background of, or the backbone of the tribal state partnership. Next slide. And so again, referencing or talking about the tribal state work group that Teota referenced, it was founded in 2006 as a venue to bring some of the representatives from the state and tribal child welfare agencies together to collaborate and advocate on relevant child welfare issues. And so leadership from the Oklahoma Children's Court Improvement Project actually joined this work group in 2016, and that's been incredibly helpful. It's co-chaired on by both state and tribal representatives. The current co-chairs are Dr. Deborah Shropshire with DHS, she's the child welfare director, and Karen Hamilton, who's with Sac and Fox Nation, and she is their Indian child welfare director. And a lot of the state's advancements in ICWA compliance and practice had their roots in this collaborative group. And again, like Teota had referenced, the creation of the tribal program units within DHS, the creation of the ICWA Snapshot project, with which Jonathan's going to elaborate more on. And they also helped make the decision to apply for this ICWA Partnership Grant. Next slide.
As referenced earlier, the ICWA Snapshot was a project that the Tribal State Work Group worked together with Casey Family Programs on. And basically the project was an attempt to collect some accurate practice data for what outcomes for Native children and families look like in Oklahoma. And so this is a multi-year project that went on that resulted in the publication of a report by Casey Family Programs. But I think what it really showed was that the Tribal State Work Group was capable of collaborating and working together to do some really big things that would move our state forward in terms of ICWA partnership. Next slide, please.
So real quickly, a little bit about our ICWA partnership grant. In 2016, as an effort of the Tribal State Work Group, Oklahoma DHS, the Oklahoma Indian Child Welfare Association, OICWA, and the Oklahoma Children's Court Improvement Program applied for this grant to improve ICWA compliance, practice, and outcomes in the state. The application was awarded later that year, and some of the grant projects have focused on participatory planning together with the people who are doing the work. And this is the hopes of that was to increase the likelihood that progress is sustained beyond the life of the grant. Our next slide, grant goals were to improve the safety, permanency, and well-being of American Indian children and families through improved communication, training, accountability of child welfare and court systems as it relates to ICWA. And next slide, our grant objectives have been, we identified 3 primary objectives to advance during the life of the grant. And those were to build or enhance relationships between state and tribal, or state child welfare court and tribal systems, build or enhance ICWA compliance with clearly defined policies and procedures within the state court and tribal systems, and then also to build or enhance current management information systems, resulting in more timely and effective communication among the tribes and state government and courts. Next slide.
So relationship building, in an effort to learn and gain in-depth knowledge of the strengths and challenges statewide, the grant team conducted key informant interviews. The key informant interview process included conducting interviews with 143 key stakeholders that included representatives from tribes, courts, DHS, and local community stakeholders. The grant team interviewed all 38 federally recognized tribes housed here in Oklahoma, the Indian Child Welfare Director and additional staff members, just to have that collective tribal input. And through the key informant interview process, the grant team focused on building relationships, identifying training needs, and assessing the needs regarding ICWA practice statewide. Another focus was just creating and strengthening those relationships and connecting and respect. In addition to the key informant interview process, other areas that focused on relationship building that were already in those existing structures here in Oklahoma, outside of Tribal State Work Group, was the expansion and enhancement of the OICWA committees to include representatives from specific areas and having a specific skill set. The existing tribal CPTs here in Oklahoma, there's 4. Our pilot projects were selected from those areas where collaboration already existed. And then the Oklahoma County judges and tribal partners meeting, just through support, grant support, we have been able to expand and enhance and actually send that team to some of our OICWA conferences through scholarships with just intentional training on the focus area around ICWA courts. Next slide.
So one of the main things that we were able to accomplish as part of this grant is to help to support the creation and operation of a pilot project in Pottawatomie County, which is a county in Oklahoma that's east of Oklahoma City that has the city of Shawnee in it. And so we were able to come together to help to create a local leadership group from tribal staff as well as DHS and court people in that area. And together with them, we performed some additional key informant interviews. These were more specific to their local needs. And we paid close attention to, where their needs were similar to what we heard about in the statewide key informants and what were really some unique challenges there in Pottawatomie County. And so following the completion of all those interviews, we presented that data to them and said, here's what your people are saying the needs are in this area. What do you want to focus on to work on? And what they identified was they wanted to work on strengthening their working relationships together. And the way that they selected to do that is they created a collaborative case staffing process where they would get together regularly to discuss challenging cases and to to work together to try to overcome barriers to get better outcomes for children and families, but also just create opportunities to just build natural collaborative working relationships. We were also able to create an original research design that tracked both the collaborative attitudes of the people who were involved in the project, but also tracked the documented communication that was going on between DHS and tribes. And our research showed that for people who participated in this participatory case planning process, they had significantly better communication with their tribal partners and also had significantly better attitudes about collaboration in the area. Next slide, please.
The other objective around policy and practice wanted to build and enhance ICWA compliance with just clearly defined policies and procedures within state, court, and tribal system. And I'll provide an overview of projects that were supported through ICWA Partnership Grant around policy and practice. In Pottawatomie County, the pilot project that Jonathan just shared, there were two policy and practice changes there. In Pottawatomie County, there was a new notification to tribes and just establishing protocol to be used with state child welfare workers and notifying tribes when an Indian child is identified or is an alleged victim. In Pottawatomie County, we helped support the development of case review process, and SANCAP, Shawnee Area Native American Child Protection Team, those co-chairs, tribal co-chair, state co-chair, helped develop the SANCAP processing map and case staffing form so that there, is a system in place to be able to have that information sharing, problem solving, and communication. The ICWA annual conference really was our platform to provide the dedicated training sessions. So through our key informant interviews, we learned what the identified training needs were from all three partners, and we're able to really build training sessions that were unique and specific to Oklahoma. Some of those were ICWA courts, active efforts, ICWA 101, how to work a ICWA case with DHS, jointly with DHS and Indian Child Welfare. And we've been tailoring those training sessions over the last 4 years. And so that grant funds help to just expand and enhance the additional support through speaker fees and scholarships so that we could include targeted people. And through that process, we have a training inventory and are working on housing that training inventory and curriculum on the OICWA website. The OICWA website really is another place where we were able to expand and enhance communication. We really, in year 1 and year 2, we're just kind of restructuring and rebranding and getting the infrastructure built. We looked at that through phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1 was completed, and we are currently working on phase 2. Phase 2 really expands that vision around partnership. We will have 2 dedicated sessions or sections for OKDHS and CIP as partners, as well as like a registry for resources on a federal, national, tribal, and local level. One of the other areas that really has been instrumental in identifying those tribal resources was the development of a resource binder. And that project started in the Pottawatomie County pilot project and has plans to expand statewide just to identify those tribal resources and have a landing spot, housing place to be able to access that. The Keeping the Sage Burning, that was a project that really was birthed through Oklahoma Committee or OICWA Substitute Care Committee. And that project focuses on Oklahoma's pre-service foster and adoptive parent curriculum and ICWA training, just increasing ICWA and cultural knowledge for Oklahoma foster and adoptive families. It was led by OICWA, supported by grant funding, and that project ends with a 14-minute video that will be used within that pre-service curriculum. And we are currently working on 2 additional projects following Keeping the Sage Burning around the hearing from the voice of ICWA adoptees and foster parents providing care for tribal children. Tulsa County ICWA Court, that has been just a wonderful place to see the growth of the Tulsa County ICWA Court. In Tulsa County, we hosted a kickoff meeting in December, and from that kickoff meeting, we now have a plan for working towards just shared vision and developing an action plan. In response to that, DHS established ICWA units that will begin to grow and expand with the shared vision and action plan from the strategic planning meeting. And that really, the communication plan and the collaboration that really exists through the OICWA Special Projects ICWA Court Committee. Next slide.
And our third objective was to find a way to have better data and information sharing between partners. And we've done a lot of work on this, but a couple of highlights are listed here. One is our automated ICWA snapshot. As I referenced earlier, the Tribal State Work Group had worked together with Casey Family Programs to produce a snapshot of what ICWA practice looked like at the time. And while that was really great work and innovative and impactful, it also took us like several years to do the detailed work that we needed to be able to get that data out to people. And by the time it was collected, you know, it was already a little bit dated in terms of its publication. And so we thought, well, we can take the core things that the ICWA snapshot was intending to do, and hopefully we can update them to make them more timely and to be able to get people data that's current and that meets them where they are. And so what we were able to accomplish was the development of an automated ICWA snapshot where we get monthly data extracts and are able to plug those into a dashboard that are able to display data to any interested individual at a given time. And there's all sorts of different filters and measures in there that you can use to kind of narrow your focus to get the data that you want out of it. We also had a project where we were working to review court case files, and we're currently in the middle of that, but we've developed a methodology and a toolkit to be able to go into our case files in Oklahoma and to review them and to give feedback to the judges on how their case documentation is going. And so those are a couple of things that we've been able to do in terms of getting better data. Next slide, please. This is a sample of what that automated ICWA snapshot looks like currently. So you can see here, it's displaying average days from the time we receive a child welfare referral to the time that we have notification to tribes. And so you can see it's sorted out by the different regions for comparison's sake. But on the left there, you can see that you could also sort by the tribe, sort by the region, by the county. And then at the bottom, we have buttons to change that measure to look at any number of different things that may be of interest to DHS people or to tribal people or to court personnel. And this is just one of the pages that's in that report, but it exemplifies some of the things we were trying to accomplish with this. Next slide, please. So I think that when we were reflecting on the lessons that we've learned or the recommendations that we would make to other jurisdictions, the first one was that we felt that from the outset, we had the right basic design with having representatives from DHS, from courts, and from tribes. But getting that many people together did kind of make things move a little bit slower than I think everybody would have liked to from the outset. But if we want to have something that really touched on every facet of what child welfare cases looked like, we needed to have all those partners on board. And so we found that we were able to do some really impactful things programmatically that we wouldn't have been able to do without all those partners. So I'm, I think we are very grateful for the partnership of all the different organizations that have been a part of this from the beginning, and are hopeful that because we had that buy-in from everybody, that this is going to outlive the life of the grant itself.
So agenda item 2, response due to COVID-19 from a virtual perspective. No one expected that. We were not prepared for that. And so just the response to that, I think what Oklahoma learned is to respond and springboard off of the tools that we had accessible to continue to conduct business. What ICWA did really was put efforts into formalizing infrastructure through that virtual relationship perspective. What we were able to do through Zoom and technology is establish standard meeting schedules where we could host those meetings. We weren't traveling. We didn't have the drive time, and we were able to have just that representation from tribal staff, DHS staff, or court improvement partners, and just other stakeholders and service providers. And so those ICWA committees worked really hard in establishing just annual goals, annual projects, and I think really flourished with partnership and improving communication within ICWA committees. And so again, Oklahoma has the systems in place for change, improvement, compliance on a statewide level, and just strengthening that infrastructure through Tribal State Work Group, the CIP ICWA Task Force, ICWA, and the Tribal Coordinator Team on a state level, and then certainly on a local level within the tribal CPTs and our ICWA committees. And I think this model, really the collaborative model, really is truly representative of the culture of tribal decision-making. With the committees formalizing, we also indigenize. And we do that by honoring the input and just reflecting on the group's collective knowledge and communal decision-making, which that's representative of tribal council. And those committees are tribally led. I think moving forward, we put efforts into modeling that partnership, strengthening the relationships and communication and problem solving to our younger ICWA champion generations. I think that's the lesson learned and the vision from ICWA in regards to sustainability is just that peer-to-peer mentoring and thinking, 7 generations ahead.
I think the final lesson that we learned and recommendation that we have is that if you're fortunate enough to receive a grant like this, be prepared, because you can get a lot accomplished because of the money that you have and the staff that you're able to provide and the support you're able to bring. But I don't think this grant would have been as successful as it has been had we not had an existing tribal state work group and partnership between tribes and states and courts before this ever began. And I don't think that kind of doing like work during a grant is necessarily as valuable if you're also not planning for a way to sustain it once the grant is up. And so it was made very clear to us by leadership from the very beginning that this is the partnership grant, but it's not the partnership. And we need to realize that the grant is like a part of the partnership story, but not all of it. And so, we had to think about how do we sustain the progress that we've made, and how do we honor all the work that's gone on before that ever put us in a position where we could apply for a grant together. I don't think we would have had ICWA and DHS and CIP in a room together if it wasn't from Tribal State Work Group. And then that idea never comes around to, hey, let's apply for a grant. And so I know from a ICWA's perspective, especially, they've already been active in looking for some new funding to be able to continue to do some of the things that they have been pursuing. And I know there are similar plans with DHS and CIP to continue working together collaboratively to help help our state just to continue to improve in the way that we serve Native children and families. So with that, I think we'll head to the next slide, please.
So resources, and I can plug these into chat. I'll do attachments of the SANCAP processing map in case staffing form, our tribal resource directory, the Oklahoma Snapshot report and tool, and our ICWA partnership handout, as well as the Indian Child Welfare Act snapshot that was a pilot review supported by Casey Family Programs in looking at ICWA practice in Oklahoma back in 2016.
And we can also send those links to participants after the webinar. Wonderful. Oh, Jackie has joined us. Hi, Jackie. Did you want to say hello?
Hey, everybody. This is great. Thank you.
So as we transition to our next group from Minnesota, we have Bree, Bussey, and Mark Erickson, who are going to share their slides as well, I believe.
Thank you very much, Esther, and hello to Jackie. Good to see you. Hey,
Good
or
to see
no,
you.
not see you, but hear you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and play this slideshow. All right. Can everybody see that? Yes.
Yes, yes, we can.
Thank you. Okay. So Benesi Kwe, Memengwa, and Indigenous, Maingan and Dodame. I am Mohawk and Anishinaabe, and I live near Lake Superior today. My name is Bree Bussey, and I work at the Center for Regional and Tribal Child Welfare Studies up at UMD in Minnesota. And I'm here today with my colleague and friend, Mark Erickson, to talk about our ICWA partnership project. And it was named, a lot of you on this call may know, Judge Paul Day from Leech Lake is one of our folks, one of our elders who's been a part of our work for a long time. And so he gave this project this name, Ji Anishinaabe Bamadaziwug, which means so they can live the Indian way of life. Okay, so I'm going to kind of go through this slide here. The center where we are, we're located within a Department of Social Work at UMD. And a lot of the work that we've done, even though we're housed in an academic organization, we've been really rooted in the community, particularly in working with American Indian child welfare practice, ICWA practice, engaging the child welfare workforce, both public and tribal, wanting to get at reducing the disparities in out-of-home placement for American Indian children in Minnesota. A lot of you may know that we have the worst disproportionality in the country at this time for out-of-home placement. So that's kind of the lens through which we're doing our work. There's some things that we do. We're legislatively funded in the state of Minnesota to create a tribal training and certification partnership. That's kind of directly connected to this grant, actually. In terms of longevity and moving the work forward and making sure that we're going to be able to continue to engage with the child welfare workforce. So that just happened, and that was really pushed by our tribal relatives and the tribes in Minnesota. So we do child welfare training statewide. We have a Summer Institute, an ICWA Institute, and National ICWA work. That's just a little snippet of some of the things that we do. But I want to talk with you a little bit about, this project and where it all began. So we began court monitoring ICWA cases in partnership with the American Indian Center, the Minneapolis American Indian Center, which was monitoring ICWA cases for over 20 years down in the metro, down in Minneapolis and St. Paul area. And through just relationship building, we joined on a national project called the ICWA Compliance Project. I think there were 25 national partners at that time. Jonathan, I think you mentioned, giving a shout out and acknowledging, those that went before us, and who have built this work. So a lot of the work that we have done was built, we build on things. So our model is to train MSW, Masters of Social Work students, to monitor ICWA cases. And our hope is to kind of shape what they're going to do in their practice with families, American Indian families. So as a result of court monitoring, and we pull together through our local Children's Justice Initiative group, a group of colleagues who started kind of meeting together. We didn't share the data that we were collecting right away because we didn't have access to all of the information. Okay? Our data was at the time, we were looking at what we were able to observe in courtrooms, during the hearing. But we did immediately kind of pull together a group of colleagues to start talking about this. And an opportunity was presented to us through an NCJ, FCJ to pilot a national ICWA training in Duluth in August of 2014. There was a couple of different groups that came together and they were wanting to pilot this national training, and they were looking for a place, and it was just one of those things where all of the stars and planets aligned, and they wanted a pilot site, and we had a group of folks, and it just worked out. And so we had Tom Lido and Margaret from Tribal Star, we had Judge Thorne, we had all kinds of folks kind of descend on Duluth, and we had a fantastic 2-day really beautiful training. I think there were like upwards of 70 or 80 people there. And the training was really structured deeply on the why about ICWA. I'm looking at the history, looking at what has happened here. And at the time in 2014, this was the first time it was any kind of an interdisciplinary training that had this particular kind of lens. And we had public child welfare folks, we had tribal folks there, we had a whole mix of different people. And it was just the right time and the right place for people to come together and have that experience. So a local judge was at that training, and her name is Judge Sally Tarnowski, and she just said, I want to pull together a group. Can we form some kind of an equity? She just said, I want to change how we do things. I don't know exactly what to do. Can you help me get to know some of our tribal nations here? Can we pull together a group of people and start to figure out what we can do to change how hearings are happening? And so that's how the ICWA Collaborative in St. Louis County was born. We had our first meeting in October 2014. And the judge at that time set forth her intention that she would like to start an ICWA court by 2015 April. She wanted to gather information and start that with that always ongoing ever since then. And so with that group has been meeting this whole time. Hey, and so we already had, just as was just mentioned, we had an existing kind of a tribal state work group that was already looking kind of deeply at what it was going on. So we applied for the grant. These are the formal partners in the grant, formal partners and supporters, I would say. NCJ, FCJ, we partnered with to do a very extensive evaluation part of the grant as well. And that's a whole other 25-minute talk, but this is kind of who we had at the table. At our very first ICWA Collaborative meeting, one of our beloved elders, John Morin from Grand Portage, gave a recommendation to everybody there. And he said, the key to effective ICWA implementation is to create a system within a system that has its head and heart in balance. And that was really where we launched from. That was what we wanted to be able to do. So our project focus, clearly working on ongoing ICWA court development, which we've done. We're now in our 7th year of our ICWA court. We created an ICWA institutional analysis for the Human Services Agency. There was also an evaluation aspect. Like I said, we're in our 6th year. We did a lot of things with this grant. But for the purpose of this particular call and recommendations that we might want to share from our jurisdiction based on our experience with the work that we did, I think, you know, what I'm going to share with you today is what this process was like in trying to understand what was happening. We knew we had terrible data, you know, in Minnesota. We had terrible outcomes, but we didn't know how that was happening. And so we partnered with a organization. Can you see that bar there too, everybody? Or do I need to move that, or is that just my, hang on, does that move? Let me do this. I don't know if you even saw that. So we partnered with an organization called Praxis International, and they already had an existing institutional analysis that they created that looked at how the system, the criminal justice system, responds to domestic violence. And so what we did is we kind of co-created with Praxis an institutional analysis that looks specifically at ICWA and ICWA implementation. Okay? We wanted to understand how things happened. We knew what was happening, but we didn't know how it was happening. Okay? Oops, why is that doing that? Hang on, there we go. So just a little bit of background. In IA, the big picture of what it does is it finds a way to speak to the gap. It finds the gaps between what people need, what we want to see happen, and what the involved institutions are actually structured to provide. And it examines how practitioners are organized and coordinated to do their work. Okay, so it's a kind of a broader, more of a systems way of looking at how do we get these results? How do we get these outcomes? What is happening that causes these kinds of disparities? And it's very different. You know, one of the, I think, largest areas of learning, I think, for us was trying to wrap our mind around the whole data collection process. And when we look at how we gather data and how we want to find a way to tell stories about what's happening so we can put our heads and hearts together and figure out how to fix things, is we end up counting what people are doing. And that's useful, but it doesn't get to how things happen. And so an institutional analysis is not a performance review tool. It doesn't assess individual effectiveness. It's not going to help you get rid of that one trouble person, that troublemaker over there. But what it does is it's a deep look at the institutional response to a particular issue. And that's where we just took a deep dive. It took us probably 2 years. We were kind of, you know, building the ship as we were flying it, kind of a thing. Hey, but that's what we ended up creating, is this whole institutional analysis looking at ICWA. So our question that we asked is, how is St. Louis County Public Health and Human Services organized to implement the Indian Child Welfare Act and the Minnesota Indian Family Preservation Act? We have our own state law. And I should note that St. Louis Public Health and Human Services, there's a northern and a southern office, and we were focusing on the southern office in Duluth, Minnesota. And so we built the IA around the focus areas of the grant that was put forth, you know, from the Children's Bureau, which were these items. You know, we're looking at these actual purpose areas with ICWA. Okay, so we built a case file review tool that we used to, you know, do a case file review, but we wove in, this is what we want to look for in the systemic response, how the system is structured to do these things. One of the things, you know, from a context of wanting to be helpful, is, you know, institutions are structured to keep themselves going. You know, they are not currently, in our experience, necessarily structured to implement the Indian Child Welfare Act. You know, Human Services or a child welfare agency. And so we wanted to get to how, you know, how those structures are built and what to do to change those structures. And so this is a little map of what an IA does. So we have a question, and Here's some things that we do, second box, we do some things, we interview, focus groups, observations, and we identify some problems. We've got some problems here. Then we have to be able to be clear about how something is a problem in relation to what it is that we want to find out. Oh shoot, someone's at my door. I'm going to keep going. Let's see. Oopsie. And then we look, we want to make sure we have enough evidence. We want to make sure that we can point to how we know what these problems are. Okay. And then what we might want to do to solve the problem. Okay. There's a map. It's a really nice map, and it's a really helpful way to frame conversations and framing the work and moving forward. And this is kind of another visual of all of the things that organize and teach workers, whether you're in human services, whether you're in the courts, whether you're a guardian or a CASA. All of these linkages are around every single worker that engages with our families. And these are the things that teach people what to do. And so these are the things that we wanted to have a deep look at. So we did some observation, text analysis, and interviews, and kind of wove all of that together. We created an IA team. We pulled together public and tribal folks from across the child welfare system, a team of about 12 to 15 people, I want to say. And we just started, there's a whole process that we created and with Praxis. This is a little overview. This is a 20-minute overview. An example of text analysis is a very close reading of all the forms, reports, files, training curricula. What forms do you use? Let me see how you do intake. How do you do this? And then we did that. We mapped out, how an ICWA case, quote unquote, kind of moves its way through the child welfare system. So we looked at text and we looked at forms and processes throughout multiple points throughout the life of a case, quote unquote. And we wanted to understand how institutions coordinate workers and how someone's case, quote unquote, becomes the official account of people, of families, of children. Okay. So types of text, these things. You look at administrative text, case files, all the things. You look at all kinds of things. Okay. What's really important, and this is kind of a very beautiful part of the process, is the folks, and you're also, engaging, folks in the institution, in the organization, in our case, St. Louis County Human Services, as a part of a team, you're co-investigators in understanding this. And then folks, over time begin to understand how texts, how case files actually stand in for the people involved and become the official version of the story for families, even if it isn't true. And that actually happens a lot. And we knew that, but I think what it was a very beautiful part of this process was, I think, for other actors, or other, not actors, but other colleagues, I guess, in the system, to understand, wow, we better be really careful about what we write down. We better be really careful about how we're talking about families or what it is that we're doing. It was a deep experience, I think, for us. Here's some questions to ask about agency forms and protocols. How do we understand this? How might it lead to a problem? And then we did some observations. We spent a lot of time. The key to observations is to really make a distinction between what practitioners actually do compared to what they think that they're going to do. And this is all, and this isn't coming from a judgy lens at all. This happens in every system. Well, here's what we do. Well, no, maybe not. Here's what you think you do, but here's what you actually do. And then to really be able to take some time and understand whether those align. Okay, that's another very strong part of this. If we're looking at wanting to create a system where it's going to effectively implement the Indian Child Welfare Act, effectively know how to engage tribes and defer to tribes and build relationships, those kinds of things. So then we identify some gaps. We connect the gaps back to those trails, those linkages I showed you, the linkages all around the workers, and then work together as our tribal state partnership team. Okay. We identified what we did. We identified 6 gaps. we were really intentional in not coming up with 97 gaps, because that would have, we could have done that, but we kept it to 6 critical gaps that were findings. And then we are, working together to identify how to close those gaps. Okay? And that's an ongoing journey. One of the things that happened was that the whole petition writing process changed in our jurisdiction. That was much more friendly for families, certainly, and much more meaningful and structured the way that ICWA was going to be implemented and things like that. And we're currently, in that process of co-creating a new systemic response that goes across systems. The other thing I think we learned is that, the child welfare system is really structured to be compartmentalized and very adversarial. And this really, we needed to not do it that way. And this was a way for us to be able to look at that structure and break down those barriers and to co-create something together that is not adversarial. And so this is our theory of change. We borrowed those feathers on the bottom from the Capacity Building Center for Tribes. Those are leadership qualities, identified by the CBCT in tribal child welfare leadership training, and they're so beautiful and they fit so well because we're engaging, all kinds of folks from across the system, and these are the things that we're asking our partners and our relatives to, so that we can do this together, to be adaptive, collaborative, distributive, inclusive, outcome focused. Those are kind of qualities that frame what this is. And this is kind of our litmus test and our goal. It was, what we wanted to do was create a learning child welfare system. We wanted to find a way to cultivate a space, create a space where this child welfare system could become a thing that learns. And so this is how we did that, transparency, building understanding, cultivating trust, nurturing collaboration. Those are the things that create a learning child welfare system. Okay. And so this is our compass. Okay. So I'm not going to share with you the specific results that we found because they're specific to our jurisdiction. But I can let you know, that these are really universal problematic features of institutions, and this is actually created by Praxis International, and we're making them ICWA specific. But any of all y'all, who are working in a system, you can look at this list and say, yes, this happens. Yes, we fragment and compartmentalize very complex lives. We categorize people. We live on institutional time compared to actual lived time that humans live on. We put the needs of the institution above the needs of the people, the families. We talk all the time. We create communication, without dialogue, and that happens through text, reports, email. We create a fictitious universal person. So here's what people ought to be able to do in a year. Here's our permanency timeline. That's not based in reality, eh? And then oftentimes, systems use coercion, to gain compliance. And then we make social problems and the whole context around the challenges faced by our families, individual problems, and not see them in their proper light. And so framing this work and framing an institutional analysis and looking at how to kind of tease apart and understand and find a way to talk about and discover what is happening in your jurisdiction. Your needs are going to be according to your own jurisdiction. And so the framework that we used is, assume that everyone wants to do a better job. We just led from that place, and holding an understanding that it's a very courageous act for an agency to let us all into the basement, and we're going to open up the boxes. We're going to look at all the things, and that's an act of courage for an agency to be willing to do that, and to always frame our work in partnership and emphasize the partnership. This is not like an audit, like you're being audited by the IRS. We are co-investigators, and we're co-creators, okay, in this journey of trying to create a better system, okay. And then, of course, avoid judging as you listen. And in terms of this work, and I think, the heartbeat really of ICWA implementation or ICWA, compliance is really a collaboration. Okay, it requires all of these systems to be able to work together. Okay, and in this time that we find ourselves in, I think, you know, things are very, very polarized all over the place. And so it takes kind of that piece of intentionality, you know, to not have a judging way, and to be non-polarizing. We have to suspend what we think we know about something. We found out all kinds of things that we had no idea. It was incredibly powerful. Focusing on the job, the structure of the job, and not the person is what needs to change. And remember that the goal is to improve the systemic response, not to intervene, discipline or embarrass people or agencies, and to continually thank practitioners for time, insights, and contributions to the process. And then our, lessons learned or recommendations for collaboration from our perspective, based on our experience, is that it takes, courage and the willingness to question current practice and then think really critically, critical thinking, and to do that together. And then that means that we're gonna navigate some pretty difficult conversations, but we need to do it in a good way and be mindful about, holding a space for that change to occur. Every meeting we've ever had, every meal we've ever had together, we've opened it in a good way with a prayer from our our elders in the room. And so we will always do that. The work needs to include the voices of families and tribal partners. Hold an awareness that we all have so much to learn from each other. All of us do. This requires from all aspects of the system, ongoing self-reflection. And I think what that means is, some of us, we kind of go along on that journey, and then we realize, I have to be the change in my system. I have to be the one to make this change and to do this differently. And to understand, the difference between leadership and authority. Okay. And from our perspective, in an Indigenous perspective, what does leadership mean? Okay. And it means that we grow other leaders. We look for leadership qualities in other people, and we grow and cultivate and honor that. And then any changes that are made have to benefit the community and not the system. Okay, so those are kind of our overview lessons learned and recommendations. Okay, that's it in a nutshell. Miigwech.
Only one. Thank you, Bree. We had a couple of questions in the Q&A. The first one: although this process was focused on ICWA and the tribes, have you seen it improve processes for all child welfare cases? So has it had, I guess the question is, has it had an impact on child welfare at the department?
I think that is an excellent question. We absolutely know that it has had a drastic improvement in ICWA cases. And we have the court data, and we have the human service data to show that. I honestly have not seen direct data that speaks to other child welfare cases. I mean, there's a part of me, I would like to say yes, because this has been such a huge collaborative kind of a process. I would like to say, I think that's likely, but I cannot speak that it has for sure.
Mark, do you want to weigh in on that question, or add anything else to the presentation before we move to the next question?
Well, I mean, what I'll say about that is, first of all, the one exciting thing about all of this, for the purposes of people on the webinar today, is that we will have like a ICWA specific IA guidebook that's just being wrapped up so that other jurisdictions can pick it up and run with it. Bree mentioned that we were very careful about not sharing what was specific to our jurisdiction. That being said, those 6 findings, those 6 gap areas, you could close your eyes and imagine those being probably any jurisdiction has those problems. And what having those gap statements did is, by having those existing relationships in place, and that would continue to be cultivated through the process, like Jonathan was talking about in their jurisdiction, it gave that time for those things to kind of settle in. So like those gaps, for example, or writing our final report, it actually took a long time because it hit the agency very hard, and it took a while to work through that relationally to get to a point where the findings kind of settled in, and the report was written in a good way that was kind of like a way where the agency felt like they could disseminate it down to throughout their ranks, to use it's not the best term, but and then also after that report then was disseminated and those themes sunk in, that gave time for us to come together and allow the people that were involved in our tribal state partnership team to really sit back and say, okay, so these are our focus areas, and we broke them up into groups and really let them decide how best to resolve and address those gaps. And then using the pandemic, it was an excellent time to then kind of categorize and code all those. And then the county, I have to give them so much credit for just really taking that feedback from the IA, from the gaps, from those proposed solutions, and kind of do a self-assessment of what they could address, how they could do that, what's already happening. So that's a very long answer to say, if you're doing this work or you're taking an approach like this, it's important to recognize the role that time plays in this from the perspective that there's already stuff that was happening within the agency, and this is how I'm addressing the question. I agree with Bree. I don't have any data in front of me about non-ICWA cases, but I can say the agency was already invested in embarking on this model that they call relationship-based, safety-oriented practice. So coming at all their child welfare cases from that approach and that using that lens, they then could take this ICWA specific stuff and see, oh, but we have to, if we're going to do that, we have to incorporate these ICWA elements into that as well. So for example, just to give a few, so they're already on this track, right, with their family case map, for example, but because of the ICWA work, they were able to say, well, okay, we're doing this family case map, but what does that look like for American Indian families that we're working with, and how are we capturing active efforts? So they started incorporating things that were already happening. So I agree with Bree that I don't know the answer to that question, but I think the point is that if you're coming in with a model like this and you're just thinking you're going to observe and things are going to stay static until you're done with your work, that's not the way it works. And a lot of these things are in flux. And again, another thing that happened from people rallying around the gaps or and also the relationships that we built through collaboration. One of the things is I think it's just created a healthier environment for people to be more, I guess, bold or adaptive in their leadership within the agency, and being able to try new things. And I know that's been a really great result. And I feel like that has kind of worked its way throughout the agency. So that's how I would address that particular question. I don't know, but like Bree, I'm hopeful.
Would be interesting to see. Somebody wanted to look at the data and figure it out. I have a feeling that it has probably impacted caseworkers' practice wherever, with whatever population from there. We had another question that says, can you give us an example or elaborate a bit more of what we write in our case notes and how it could impact our families? And that might be maybe if any of the participants have ideas too, that they can put in the chat what you write, how you write your case notes.
Well, that one I can, again, I don't know about specific term. I mean, I can give you a specific example. Like you could, if you're reading a case file review and you're reading notes and you see something like, oh, mom only went to 3 or missed 3 of her UAs or something like that in between court hearings or something like that. A strength-based case note could be something like, despite having to get to work, having visits with her child, mom was able to make it to 7 of her 10 scheduled UAs or whatever between hearings. So, I mean, that's kind of the concept. The best way I could say where we saw that play out, and it's super exciting, and Bree mentioned it in her presentation, is again, as a result of the IAA. And one of the findings we had about text is this whole like rewriting of the petition for ICWA cases. And that was really quite fascinating. So I want to see who asked the question just so I know. Oh, I lost it. Oh, Guadalupe. Okay, yeah, from Wisconsin too. Okay, yeah. So just to give you an idea for that, in Duluth, in the southern St. Louis County, the petitions were kind of infamous for being incredibly long, including absolutely everything about the family, their entire interaction with the child protection system, even when they may have been minors in the system themselves, like dating back that far. And the rationale for it from the county attorney's perspective, which I totally get, is that, hey, we're putting it all out there for discovery so things don't have to go to trial. And we're basically throwing everything the county has about the family so that there are no surprises, right? But it was very clear that that was very difficult for families to take in. And it wasn't very helpful for professionals either who were reading the petitions. So when a family reads that and they see some information that they deem to be completely inaccurate, and admittedly petitions are usually written, within 72 hours and usually handed to the family and people appearing for court right there at that initial hearing. So they're sometimes literally hot off the press when people are receiving them. There are inaccuracies in them and there are things that are wrong and they become sticking points. And not only that, but they also re-traumatize families. And by digging up all this stuff that has nothing to do with the immediate or imminent safety concern. So in this petition rewriting process, what we did is, first of all, we allowed the family to say who they were. So instead of just having a race category, we added a tribal affiliation category, and the family can just identify however they like as far as their tribal affiliation. On top of that, then what we did was we flipped things I'm trying to think of what the order of the petition was, but we flipped things chronologically so that the immediate safety concern was on the top, and then all that history that was deemed important by the county was still in there, but it was bulleted and it came further down the bottom. And I'm trying to think of how we actually ordered it, because there may have been a section before or after the immediate safety concern, but basically it was this idea, and this is what Bree was talking about, like how has the county to this point worked with the family? How has the county provided active efforts to this family? How has the county reached out and notified the tribe? That's another exciting thing the county has done. They've added specialists just to do inquiry and notice. But anyway, so they address all those elements of our Minnesota Indian Family Preservation Act and the county response to it. So that was like one of those things that we were told can't be done. It can't be changed. We can't change the petition. It's just the way it is. We've tried to leave history out before, and it's just caused problems because then more cases go to trial, and then people are asking for discovery and whatever the justification was. So that's an example of something that over time and through these relationships, the ask then just switched. Okay, so we're not going to switch the petition here. We're not going to write differently about families here. We recognize it's a court petition, so you might not be able to lay out all the strengths that the family brings to the hearing, which is what the original ask was. But can we pretend we're talking about another jurisdiction and just put our heads together and just make one that maybe someone else could use? If it's impossible here, let's just imagine it for someone else and we'll share it. And we started doing that. And eventually the assistant county attorney, who Bree and I both are very fond of through this process, started to shift and say, we can do this. We can do this better. In fact, I have an idea about this that, we actually should be doing this anyway, and so on and so forth. And this thing that just became like a pipe dream just became best practice. And it was really cool to see. So not a specific answer about what we write about families. Again, that's why I use that UA example of what strengths-based language could look like. But it is an example to say that we recognize that when families see what we write about them, it can be very jarring and very counterproductive to reunification.
The other thing, I think another piece, this is just kind of incidental, but some folks started calling our county attorney auntie. So
Oh, that's great. So we had another question in the chat from Bethel, Alaska. For those who have a state ICWA law in place, I know state laws are initiated and implemented through state legislatures, but I was curious to know how the process was catalyzed or initiated in your state. And I don't know if that's a question directly for our panelists or if people, participants want to put that in the chat.
well, I mean, I think that there's a long history to that in our state. Our first MIFPA, I think, was passed in, I want to say 2005 or 2007. It's been updated and gone through the legislature again. But that's really something that was led by, we have 11 tribes in Minnesota. We have 7 Anishinaabe tribes and 4 Dakota tribes. And so that was led by our statewide ICWA Advisory Council and it's called MIAC, which is the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council. So those 2 entities, along with tribal nations, are the ones who really led that work back in the day, and hold it strong now. I don't know. I apologize. There's a long history there, but it was initiated by the tribes.
Wonderful.
And our law in Oklahoma has been around for a very long time, certainly before my time. So I can't say as I know the history of it, but I will say that we have had some discussions with some like national ICWA law experts. And one of the things that they have repeatedly stressed to us is the importance of having some ICWA legislation on your state books, because increasingly as ICWA winds up in federal court more and more frequently for different things, it's sort of been a comfort to our ICWA tribe or our ICWA partnership in Oklahoma that we do have an OICWA to fall back, even if something should be changed on the federal level with federal ICWA. Now, you know, the cases have gone different ways and they've said different things, but it is nice to have that, you know, that basis for ICWA practice to fall back on in case something were to happen.
I can add a little bit here about Oklahoma. Really, that's kind of the grassroots basis, just history around the establishment of OICWA. The Oklahoma Indian Child Welfare Act was signed into law in 1982, and that was really a result of a task force that worked just tirelessly to advocate for Oklahoma Indian children. And so that task force evolved into OICWA, but that significant milestone is really working collectively and collaboratively with legislature to pass an Oklahoma Indian Child Welfare Act. And I think one of the things that Oklahoma really should be proud for is, as I mentioned earlier in our presentation, is that the Oklahoma Indian Child Welfare Act is really stronger than the federal act. And I see Tracy Haney on as a participant. I wish he could come off mute and be able to provide some of that history, because he served as OICWA president for a while and probably has more in-depth information than what I can share, but that's the history around Oklahoma.
Thank you so much. Well, it's we have about 15 minutes left, and we want to make sure we have enough time to hear from North Dakota, and we have Harmony Bussey. And if you're registered for the 3rd webinar, Harmony will be presenting on the 29th as well, in the 3rd in our series, with a closer look at active efforts in the ICWA Family Preservation Program in North Dakota. So, but we're also glad that she's here to share about this. Thank you, Harmony.
Hi, bonjour, everybody. I'm going to talk real fast and try to just hit a few of the bigger points to share real quick today, because we will have, like she said, please join us next week where we will dive a little bit deeper into the work that we've done here in North Dakota, primarily around active efforts and the ICWA Family Preservationist Program. But one thing that I loved hearing from the other grantees is relationships. That is probably one of the biggest lessons learned, is the value and the importance of building really strong relationships with all of our partners, tribal, state, county, family partnerships. Partnerships are just so important. Without building them, I don't think we would have gotten where we are today. So I cannot stress enough the importance and the different ways we did all kinds of different things to enhance partnerships. We built teams. We were very strategic about how we built our teams that was going to guide this work. So we kind of had a little bit of a head start here in North Dakota. One of the things I think that helped us get this grant is that CIP worked with the University of North Dakota with Melanie Sage and Avery Davies and Heather Trainer, all worked really hard, and they did an audit of every ICWA case over multiple years. And they compiled that data, and they looked at notice and active efforts and tribal involvement, QAW testimony. So we kind of had a good idea when we began this work of where we needed to focus. And we took that information when we began the work with this grant, and we developed, we used a design team logic model to move our work forward. And that was also very instrumental. And I can't talk enough about how that process and that way of working worked very well for us here in the state. So we have a state design team and a tribal design team, and our state design team is made up of state administrative CFS staff, training institute, the Native American Training Institute, the Children Family Services Training Institute, as well as all of our tribal partners, the Guardian Ad Litem program. Like anybody and everybody who touches a state child welfare case was strategically invited to be a member of this team. And we had, I think it was Jonathan who talked about how difficult it is to have, how difficult it is to get a large group of people together, but we've always had about 2/3 of attendance in our large team. Our state design team is 37 people, but if they weren't all able to make it, a majority of them would, and they would send proxies and different things like that. So, really, making sure you have the right people, the right, systems, because to break down these silos and to bring all of that work together is really, really important. And that's what I think we did well. We did things like taco in a bag, just kind of social things. Any way we could find to build relationships, we did. So that's one of the biggest things I think that really moved this work forward. And because of that, we were able to take, like I said, the audit work, and we were able to convene these groups and break them down into smaller groups and divvy out work, really is what we did. Once we identified, our biggest challenges in the state of North Dakota, then we took that, we broke it down, we prioritized it as a group, and then we divvied it up, and everybody had a job all over the state. We invited then to our affinity groups, and that's kind of the smaller work pieces, breaking our work down into small pieces that we can manage to make movement, and we did that. And that was really, that part is really instrumental in the work that we've done, the relationships, and then making, bits and pieces of work workable and very focused, and bringing the right people to the table. And so I did a presentation not too long ago, and one of the questions I got was, how do you get invited to the table? It was somebody who was down south, and that you were experiencing difficulty in getting invited to these tables where decisions were being made. And one of the things that I said to that was, you build the table with them, so that's kind of our philosophy that we've worked with. So, you know, we've done a lot of really wonderful things that we have a lot of trainings we developed. One of the things that we do here in North Dakota is we train with the same training, no matter what group we're training. You know, so the ICWA training that was developed early on in this grant is the training we use to train QBWs, to talk to Indigent Defense, you know, whoever we're working with, they get the same training, you know, so there's that consistency, which we think is really important. And of course we tailor it, you know, and we talk about how they do their piece, you know, but we also talk about how others do their piece. So kind of a cross training system. I guess, you know, another one of the great accomplishments, and one of the things that the most glaring thing that the audit revealed was qualified expert witness testimony was not happening in any way that it should, or at the level it should. Very low rates of true qualified expert witness testimony were happening in North Dakota. So that's kind of one of the biggest problems we tried to tackle. So we developed the Native American Training Institute, who was a subcontract to the University of North Dakota, had the big grant. And then we subcontracted to our partners at NADI, and they developed a qualified expert witness training model. And the reason why I call that a model is, you know, this training, we feel that, you know, in order for a qualified expert witness training to be effective in your state, it has to talk to your state, and it has to use the terms and, you know, the different terms for hearings and all of the jargon that each state has. You know, it has to be tailored. So we're currently developing a train the trainer manual that is kind of manipulative, it's not the right word, that can be manipulated by your state and tribes to include their, you know, relevant information, you know, but NADI would support the consultation. You know, our training is in 3 pieces. We do ICWA training, the same training that child welfare certification gets, same training that we give to everybody. And then we do CIP. We worked with CIP. They developed a training for the judicial system, so to talk about that. And then NADI developed a system for the qualified expert witness piece, kind of how to do that thing. And that all culminates and ends with a real kind of trial in court, a mock trial. So we ask judges to work with us, and state's attorneys and Indigent Defense, whoever can make it, and we give them that experience of going and being and sitting in that space and being and serving in that, your tribe in that capacity. So one of the great things that has come out of the work that we've done. We identified, you know, one of our affinity group focus areas was the spirit of ICWA, the why, you know, which Bree talked about, the why do we do this? Why is this important? You know, and we knew that we needed to make some headway there in gaining that understanding and that knowledge. You know, so we have ICWA Champions. It's an annual award. We're in the 3rd year. We just sent out nomination forms for this year's award. But another thing we did was we developed a training called Balancing Bias. So if you are at all familiar with cognitive behavioral therapy, we took that. I took that and applied it to a way to manage bias. So for just real quick, CBT is just an effective way to change your thoughts and the way you talk and think about yourself. So I thought, well, if it can work, and it's pretty effective, it has a lot of data to support it. And I thought, well, if that can work so well to change my thoughts about me, can it change my thoughts about you? You know, so we developed a training that we've given and shared nationally, of course, within our states. And then we've targeted counties who have asked us to come in and provide them this type of support. So it's a training that, you know, and then we provide the post support, you know, because they can use it as individuals. We have forms and tools for them to use it in supervision. And we have, they can use it in group, and it's just tools that help people be aware of their ants, we call them, automatic negative thoughts, and give them a way using the CBT model to work through those things. So one of the things that people really enjoy that training, you actually get to manage and balance one of your biased thoughts. We have a guided imagery, that is intended to elicit negative thoughts. And we use those and have our, during the training, throughout the training, get to, at the end, you end up with a balanced thought. So, and the other two things that, we have had some legislative change too. We do now, for the first time ever, have an active efforts and a qualified expert witness piece in legislation, which we're not stopping there. Jonathan talked about sustainability, and that has been on the forefront of the work that we do, and making sure that this work continues beyond the life of the grant. And we have a pretty good plan in place to make sure that that work continues. Our state design team is going to go and primarily be under CFS and CIP. We've got a lot of different ways that we are going to sustain the work that we've done here, and primarily through the Native American Training Institute. They are now the house of ICWA in the state, and they do all the training and manage all the training and support all the training, and we do analyze training and all of those different things. So, but the bigger things we've done, the biggest thing we've done, and the thing we're most proud of, is our ICWA Family Preservationist program. So I would really, if you want to learn more on this program, really lies in empowering tribes to be participants, active participants in off-reservation cases. It's a way to provide infrastructure. We've consulted with a 4E consultant, and we have done a cost allocation methodology to fund this using 4E money, and we're wrapping research around it as well, in hopes to find a way to get it to the clearinghouse so it can be a prevention intervention as well. So, but I'm out of time, so I don't.
And you won't
I'll
be
stop
joining us
there.
at the next webinar, right, Harmony?
Yeah.
It'll be, your colleagues will be there.
Yep.
But, yes, well, we'll miss you. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
And to everyone else, thank you so much for your participation. It is just about 4:30. Laura, are you putting oh, there you are.
Yes, so I am sharing some links that our presenters shared, either to their websites or their reports, and I have a number of resources that I will attach in a follow-up email to everyone who joined today. And I'm also going to share just a evaluation link so you can share your thoughts on how today's webinar went. And in the chat is also the link to register for the next session, which is going to happen next week. If you haven't registered already, that link's there for you to go ahead and do so you can learn more about what Harmony was sharing about their ICWA Family Preservation Program and their active efforts survey findings. So we really appreciate all of the presenters who joined today, and as well as you all as panelists and participants who came on and asked questions and joined us for this webinar. I will be in touch via email. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.